Hello everyone, we are going to discuss the UPSC paper that happened in 2021. This video specifically caters to paper 2 section A. Let's look at the different topics and the weightage that was given to them in this paper. So section A, which comprises of modern algebra, the total weightage of the questions was 50 marks, and this time it was groups 25 and rings also 25. The second topic was real analysis, which came for about 60 marks. Complex analysis was given weightage 45, and LPP came for 45 marks. The thing to accentuate here is that all the questions that came specifically from modern algebra and real analysis were conceptual. So if the fundamental of the topic is not clear, then it was difficult to attempt the paper. But if you knew all the theorems behind or the rationale behind all the results, then it was like an applied kind of a paper. So we will be discussing some specific questions in detail. The first question I'll discuss is question number 1A, which says that show that there is no homomorphism of S3 in Z3. There is no such homomorphism from S3 to Z3 except the trivial homomorphism. That means the only homomorphism that exists between these two is going to be the trivial homomorphism. That is what you have to show. Now the key highlight of this question is show that there is no homomorphism except. No homomorphism except. The key thing is that we cannot show something that is not happening. Show that there is no homomorphism cannot be shown. You have to take a clue from this word no, that we are going to proceed by contradiction. That means we are going to assume that there is a homomorphism except the trivial homomorphism which exists between S3 and Z3, and then we are trying to get a contradiction to it. Now how do we do that? First, a few remarks that Z3, as we all know, is nothing but 0, 1, 2 or the group of residue classes. Z3 is a group under addition modulo 3. Therefore, identity is nothing but 0. Similarly, you must analyze what S3 also looks like. S3 is the group of permutations. The order of S3 is 3 factorial, that is 6. And S3 has 6 permutations which exists from 1, 2, 3 to 1, 2, 3. So what does the structure look like? S3 has the identity map. It has a 2 cycle called 1, 2. That means 1 is going to 2, 2 is going to 1. It has a 2 cycle called 1, 3, a 2 cycle called 2, 3, a 3 cycle 1, 2, 3, and another 3 cycle which is 1, 3, 2. So these are the 6 elements of S3. We have to show there is no homomorphism from S3 to Z3 except the trivial homomorphism. So time to take a pause here and also look at what does the trivial homomorphism look like. Trivial homomorphism will be where every alpha belonging to S3 is mapped to the identity here. So phi of alpha is equal to 0 for all alpha belonging to S3 is the only homomorphism that exists between them. Okay? So we proceed by contradiction. Let, if possible, phi is a homomorphism from S3 to Z3 which is not the trivial homomorphism. That is, it does not map every element to 0. Okay. Now, we know that if phi is a homomorphism from S3 to Z3, then phi of S3 is going to be a subgroup of Z3. The homomorphic image of the domain is going to be a subgroup of Z3. Also we know that order of Z3 is 3, and by Lagrange's theorem, if H is a subgroup of Z3, then order of H needs to be a factor of 3, which means that either order of H is going to be 1 or it is going to be 3. That means phi of S3, which is a subgroup of Z3, will either have one element or it will have 3 elements. Now what we have assumed is that this is not the trivial homomorphism. That means phi of S3 does not have order 1, because we are assuming that this is not the trivial homomorphism. Therefore, phi of S3 is going to be having order 3, right? Now if it has order 3, and what kind of set it is going to be? So recall fundamental theorem, which says that if phi is a map from G to G dash and it is onto. Onto means every element here has a pre-image. So Z3 has 3 elements and order of phi S3 is becoming 3. These two together imply that phi from S3 to Z3 phi from S3 to Z3 is going to be an onto map, because this has 3 elements and order of Z3 is also 3. So if you apply fundamental theorem, the conclusion of fundamental theorem was that in this case G upon curve phi is isomorphic to G dash. So if you apply fundamental theorem here, we will get S3 upon curve phi will be isomorphic to Z3, which implies that order of S3 by curve phi will be equal to order of Z3, which further implies order of S3 matlab 3 factorial upon order of curve phi is equal to 3. If you simplify this, we are able to conclude from here that order of curve phi will become equal to 2. That means kernel of this particular homomorphism has to have 2 elements. We also know that kernel is a normal subgroup of S3. Therefore, curve phi is coming out to be a normal subgroup of order 2. Now, this is a contradiction, because if you go back to what the structure of S3 looks like, I, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 and 1, 3, 2, we can easily establish that it has no normal subgroup of order 2. It does not have any normal subgroup of order 2. So if you go back to here, order of curve phi is coming out to be 2, order of curve phi is 2, and S3 cannot have any normal subgroup of order 2. So this gives us a contradiction. Please remember, we had started with a hypothesis which we wanted to show that is not true. Therefore, we get a contradiction, and hence there is no homomorphism between S3 and Z3 except the trivial homomorphism. So we proceed by contradiction. Say, let, if possible, there exists a homomorphism, say phi, from S3 to Z3, which is not the trivial homomorphism, so which does not map every element to 0. Let us assume phi is that homomorphism which does not map every element to 0. Now let's look at some review units required. The review units required are: number 1, if phi is a homomorphism from G to G dash, then phi of G is a subgroup of G dash. if phi is a homomorphism from G to G dash, then phi of G is always a subgroup of G dash. That's the first review. Second is recall fundamental theorem, which says that if phi is a homomorphism from G to G dash, then the factor group G by ker phi is isomorphic to phi of G. Further, if this map is onto, then phi of G can be replaced by G dash. So in a sense, if phi is a homomorphism from G onto G dash, then G upon ker phi is isomorphic to G dash. Also in this case, order of G upon ker phi will be equal to order of G dash, which further, because order of the factor group is being discussed here, this is same as order of G upon order of ker phi is equal to order of G dash. So this is a second review required. The third review required is that ker phi is always a normal subgroup, is a subgroup of G, but it is not just an ordinary subgroup, it is in fact a normal subgroup of G. Ker phi is always a normal subgroup of G. The fourth and a very important part of it, the detailed solution of this is attached at the end of the video, is that S3, the structure of which was discussed previously, does not have any normal subgroup of order 2. It has subgroups of order 2, but S3 has no normal subgroup of order 2. So using all this, let us see how we are going to contradict our statement, because we remember we want to get a contradiction. We have assumed phi to be a non-trivial homomorphism from S3 to Z3, which means that order of phi S3 is not equal to 1. Also, by review 1, phi S3 is a subgroup of Z3, and by Lagrange's theorem, therefore, order of phi S3 is going to be a factor of order of Z3, which is nothing but 3. So in a sense, the number of elements in phi S3 is either 1 or 3. But we just claimed that the order is not 1. Therefore, order of phi S3 is coming out to be equal to 3. Now let us use the fundamental theorem. If order of phi S3 is 3, that means the image has 3 elements. And remember here, the codomain also has 3 elements. Therefore, equation 1 and 2 together imply that phi from S3 to Z3 is an onto homomorphism. Therefore, by fundamental theorem, if you apply fundamental theorem, what do we get? Order of S3 upon order of ker phi is equal to order of Z3. Order of S3 is 6, order of Z3 is 3. If you simplify this, we get that order of ker phi is coming out to be equal to 2. Now look at the third review, which says that kernel needs to be a normal subgroup of S3. Kernel needs to be a normal subgroup of S3 and it has 2 elements. Contradicts review number 4, which says that S3 does not have any normal subgroup of order 2. Therefore, this is a contradiction and hence what you assumed is not correct, which means the only homomorphism between S3 and Z3 is the trivial homomorphism. From the notes in the test series, there are about 3 questions that I am listing down for your practice. Show that 2Z is not isomorphic to 3Z. Now, how is this similar to the previous question? The word not. That means you have to again show there is no homomorphism between 2Z and 3Z. Remember what I told you? The word no tells you that you have to proceed by contradiction. So you'll again assume there is a homomorphism between them, which is also 1, 1 and on 2. Therefore, there is an isomorphism, and try to get a contradiction. Try and falsify the statement that there exists an isomorphism between them. Now let's look at another question. Prove that there is no homomorphism from Z8 EDP Z2 onto Z4 EDP Z4. So first thing in this question is that you must revise the concept of external direct product, and you have to show that there is no homomorphism. So again you will assume let there be a homomorphism between them. You treat this as a group G, treat this as G dash. And this mapping is given to be onto, because again you can spot the word no, so you proceed by contradiction and then apply fundamental theorem. You will get a condition on kernel which you try and then show cannot be satisfied. Last similar question is prove that there is no homomorphism from Z16 EDP Z2 onto Z4 EDP Z4. So prove that there is no homomorphism from Z16 EDP Z2 onto Z4 EDP Z4. Again spot the word no here. Try and do these three questions which are very similar to the previous question for practice. So the next question we discuss is question number 3a. It says let R be a finite field of characteristic P. So let's write down what is given. R is given to be a finite field and its characteristic is given to be P, where P is a number greater than 0 is what is written. Show that the mapping F from R to R defined as F of A is equal to A to the power of P for all A belonging to R. We have to show that F is an isomorphism. So given is that R is a finite field, its characteristic is P. F is a function defined for us from R to R. It is defined as F applied to A is A to the power of P for all A belonging to R, and we have to show that this is going to be an isomorphism. Now if you look at this question, then they have touched upon the topic of characteristic, which is not a huge topic, but it is something which is very, very relevant. And if you look at the pattern of a few years, this characteristic questions have come off and on pretty much from rings. So it's a very important topic to be done from ring theory. Now the moment you look at the symbol P, we think of P being prime, but that is not given to us in the question. So you have to again recall a result which says that if R is the actual result is that if R is an integral domain, then either its characteristic is 0 or its characteristic is a prime number. How is this relevant to us? Because remember, very important result which says that every field is an integral domain. So the result says that if you have an integral domain, then either its characteristic is 0 or it's a prime number, and what we have been given is a field, but we also know that every field is an integral domain. So what do we conclude by these two things? We conclude that this P that is given to us is a prime number. Like I said, they have not mentioned that in the question, so it is pertinent that you write that first, that we can conclude from this result, these results, that the characteristic is going to be a prime number, say P. Now you have to show let's come back to what we have to show. We have to show that F is an isomorphism. So what are the things required to show it's an isomorphism? So first we have to show it is a homomorphism. Then we have to show this mapping is 1-1. And then we have to also conclude that this mapping is onto. It will be nice if you can break these 3 into just 2, which is possible because mapping is from R to R. So if, and it is finite, both the things are important, it is from R to R and R is finite. Therefore, if the mapping is 1-1, then it will automatically be onto, and if it is onto, then it will automatically be 1-1. So out of 1-1 and onto, we have to only show 1, whatever we think is easier. So we have to therefore show 2 things. One, we have to show it's a homomorphism, and out of 1-1 and onto, we'll prefer to show 1-1. It's much easier to show 1-1 than to show onto. So we will try and show 2 things. That means let me write down my to show here. We have to show 2 things. Number 1, we have to show phi is a homomorphism, and the second thing is we have to show that phi is going to be a 1-1 map. The most important thing here is that when you try and show it to be a homomorphism, you have to show it to be a homomorphism with respect to rings. This is a question from ring theory. Because groups and rings is together in modern algebra, children definitely get confused sometimes whether it's a question of group homomorphism or ring homomorphism, because they have only said show it is an isomorphism, means show it's a homomorphism. You have to conclude that because you're talking about field theory, which is part of rings, therefore you're going to show both the properties of homomorphism. Okay, so to be a homomorphism, we'll have to show 2 things. We'll have to show phi of A plus B is nothing but phi A plus phi B, and we'll also have to show that phi of AB is phi A into phi B, and both these things have to happen for all A and B belonging to R. So that means we have to show 2 parts in the homomorphism and 1 part for 1-1. So let's see how we go around doing this. Now let us consider f of A plus B. So what is the definition of f of A plus B? It is A plus B to the power of P. Now what does this remind you of? A plus B to the power of P. Remember, P is prime. So put P equal to 3 or 5 or 7 and visualize what is A plus B whole cube. What is A plus B whole to the power of 5 to the power of 7? Automatically the expansion, binomial expansion comes out into our mind, because if you have to ever open A plus B to the power of n, we apply binomial expansion. So I hope you can recall binomial expansion. A plus B to the power of n is nc0 A to the power n B to the power 0 plus nc1 A to the power n minus 1 B plus nc2 A to the power n minus 2 B square, and dot 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 till ncn A to the power 0 and B to the power of n. This is what we're going to apply here, but the question remains, is there binomial expansion in rings, because R is a ring? The answer is yes, because if R is commutative, so note that if a ring R satisfies commutativity, then binomial expansion is valid. It's very, very important to write this down. You can't just apply binomial expansion, you have to justify why binomial expansion is possible. So let's use binomial expansion here, which means it will be of the form PC0 A to the power PB to the power 0 plus PC1 A to the power P minus 1 B to the power 1 plus dot 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 till PCP A to the power of 0 and B to the power of P. Now, if you look at what you wanted to show in the previous slide, we wanted to show that f of A plus B will be just f of A plus f of B, which related to our question, f of A is nothing but A to the power P and f of B will be nothing but B to the power P. That means you just want 2 terms. So what happens to all the other terms? Okay, let's see. Let's look at the first term. What does this term boil down to? PC0, as we all know, is, let's apply the formula of NCR. It's n factorial R factorial n minus r factorial. So what is PC0 going to be? P factorial, 0 factorial, P minus 0 factorial, which is 1. So, and anything to the power 0 is 1 again. So this just becomes a to the power p. This is a very nice term because we get a to the power p, one of the terms that we wanted in picture. Now shift your attention to the last term. Here, PCP is also 1. By the way, NCR is same as NC n minus r. So PCP is also 1. A to the power 0 is 1. So this just gives you B to the power P, which magically is the second term that we wanted in the picture. So what we don't want is the remaining terms, but you can't wish them away. What do we know about the other terms? Okay, now let's see. First of all, if P is a prime number, then P is going to be a factor of PC1, P is going to be a factor of PC2, dot 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 till P is going to be a factor of PCP minus 1. You can check it with the help of any example. You can put P equal to, P is a prime number, so put P equal to 5, P equal to 7 and visualize it, and then you can worry about the proof of this also. So remember, P divides PC1, P divides PC2, dot 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 till P divides PCP minus 1. What is this going to imply? This implies that PC1, if something is a factor of something, then PC1 can be written as some alpha 1 times P. Here, PC2 can be written as some alpha 2 times P, and dot 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 till PCP minus 1 can be written as, so look at the trend, if you're writing PC1 there is a alpha 1 symbol, PC2 is alpha 2, so here you'll get alpha P minus 1 times P. That means each of these PC1, PC2, dot 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 till PCP minus 1 can be replaced by this. So what are the remaining terms? So let's continue with this. We'll get f of a plus b has become a to the power p plus alpha 1 p times, instead of PC1 I'm writing alpha 1 p, a to the power p minus 1 b plus dot 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 till, what is one term previous to this going to be replaced by? Alpha p minus 1 p, a to the power of 1 and b to the power p minus 1 plus the last term which is going to be b to the power of p. So let's just concentrate on say one term, all the other terms will similarly behave, okay. This is alpha 1 times p times a to the power p minus 1 and b. Now if you recall, the most important thing here was that the characteristic of the ring was given to be P. What is the meaning of characteristic is P? That means P times any element of the ring is going to be 0. Characteristic is equal to P, or characteristic, the definition of characteristic is that P times R is always going to be 0, and this is true for every element coming from the ring. So what do we have now? We have P times, you can isolate P, you can write P first, it's P times something which is coming from the ring. Therefore what happens to this term? This term becomes 0. What about the next term? Similarly, because every term will have a P and P times anything is going to be 0, therefore all these terms in between are going to just vanish, and we are going to be left with what we actually wanted, which is a to the power P plus b to the power of P. So this satisfies the definition of additive homomorphism. F of a plus b we have shown will come out to be equal to f of a plus f of b. Now the next part is really simple, because remember it's a ring homomorphism, so it's simple but you still have to mention it. So our next to show, the next second part of to show is that f of ab should be fa into fb. Let's see how we'll do that. So f of ab by definition will become ab to the power of p. Again, we are working in a field. A field is commutative definitely. That was the logic of applying binomial expansion also, and that's the logic of opening it up like a to the power p into b to the power p also. Because if you recall, ab square for example is actually just ab operated with ab. But if the ring satisfies commutativity with respect to multiplication, then you can shift the a here and the b here, and therefore a square b square is the answer for ab square. And that's true for any power therefore. ab to the power p is a to the power p into b to the power p, which is f of a into f of p. Now we have shown it is a homomorphism. We have to show now the map is an isomorphism. Like we discussed before, we don't have to show 1, 1 as well as on 2 because R is finite, and so only one of them is enough. We will show that f is 1, 1. So how do we show any function is 1, 1? Let f of a be equal to f of b, and what do you want to conclude? You want to show that a will be equal to b. How is the map defined? So this is a to the power p is equal to b to the power p, and you need to conclude that a is equal to b. So how do we do that? We take the help of how we did homomorphism for addition. So remember, we did f of a plus b is a plus b to the power of p. We opened all this, used the fact that it's a characteristic, and concluded that it came out to be equal to a to the power p plus b to the power p. We do a similar thing here. We consider a minus b to the power of p and apply binomial expansion. Use the fact that p is the characteristic, and we will be able to reach this is equal to a to the power p minus b to the power of p. Remember, this happens only when a minus b is not equal to 0. A minus b, if it was 0, then the left hand side is 0, so you can't have any binomial expansion. So if this is not equal to 0, then like additive homomorphism, I can show that a minus b to the power p will be equal to a to the power p minus b to the power p, which by our hypothesis, we are assuming a to the power p is equal to b to the power p, so this comes out to be equal to 0. A minus b to the power of p is coming out to be equal to 0. What is a minus b to the power of p into a to the power a minus b to the power of minus p? This we know is nothing but a minus b to the power of 0, which is nothing but 1. Anything to the power of 0 is going to be 1. But a minus b to the power of p is coming out to be 0. So if you substitute this, you get 1 is equal to 0, which is absurd. This cannot happen. And therefore, this is not valid. This is not valid means that a minus b has to be equal to 0, which means that a has to be equal to b, which is what we wanted to show. Therefore, the mapping is 1, 1. It's a homomorphism, which is 1, 1. Therefore, it is an isomorphism, hence proved. So the next question we discuss is question number 1e. It is a question from linear programming problem. Now, the thing is that students generally tend to ignore the word problems related to LPP, but they are very, very important, as you can make out from here. It's a word problem of LPP. That means you have to read the question, formulate the problem. In fact, the question is not about really solving it as much as about just formulating the problem. So what does the question say? The question says, UPSC maintenance section has purchased sufficient number of curtain cloth pieces to meet the curtain requirements of its building. The length of each piece is 17 feet. There are many pieces of cloth that the maintenance department has purchased, and the length of each piece, there are many such pieces that have been purchased, and the length of each piece is 17 feet. The requirement according to curtain length is as follows. That means they need 5 feet, 9 feet and 7 feet long curtains, and the number required, 5 feet curtains they require 700, 9 feet they require 400, and 7 feet they require 300. That means in total of about 1400 curtains are required. For these 1400 curtains, many such pieces have been bought. Each piece is 17 feet long, and the width of all curtains is same as that of available pieces. That means width is irrelevant. This is the width that is required. There is no problem in the width. The width is same as the width of the curtains that is required. Form a linear programming problem in standard form that decides the number of pieces cut in different ways so that the total trim loss is minimum. So there are many such clothes, and we have to decide how to cut each so that we can fulfill this requirement, and at the same time keep in mind that the trim loss has to be minimized. Now, what is a trim loss? For example, if I just look at one of the ways, okay, so if this is a 17 feet long cloth, and suppose I just cater to 5 feet long curtains, how many 5 feet long curtains can be cut from here? So I can cut 5 plus 5 plus 5. That means 3 curtains, each 5 feet long, is one of the ways in which this piece can be utilized. But if I do that, 3 curtains of 5 feet long, then the total length that I have utilized is 15 feet. The loss is going to be 2 feet because the total length is 17. So trim loss basically is going to be 2 feet in this case. So trim loss is whatever is left over after the requirement of that piece has got over. What we need to do is we need to minimize the trim loss in all possible cases. All possible cases means one way was 3 curtains 5 feet long. Now suppose we try the same thing with 9. Can I have 1 curtain 9 feet long? Definitely. Can I have 2 curtains 9 feet long? No, because 2 curtains 9 feet long would mean 18 feet, but the length is only 17. So I cannot have 2 curtains of 9 feet. Can I have 2 curtains of 7 feet? Yes, because 7 and 7, 14. In that case, the trim loss will be 3 feet and so on and so forth. So what we have to basically do in this question is try and get all the possible cases and then try and see how the trim loss is going to be minimized. So let's see what are the possible cases that we have. Case 1, 3 curtains of 5 feet. 3 curtains of 5 feet. In this case, let me denote TL by trim loss. Trim loss is going to be 2 feet. Okay. Case 2. Let me have 2 curtains of 7 feet length. In this case, the trim loss is going to be 3 feet. Case 3. What is case 3? 2 curtains of 5 feet. That means total of 10 feet has been utilized. Plus, let us have 1 curtain of 7 feet. So 2 curtains of 5 feet and 1 curtain of 7 feet. That means what is the trim loss in this case going to be? 0. Now you might want to pause at this case and say, oh, this is the best possible solution. But not really. Don't forget that we need 5 feet, 7 feet and 9 feet long curtains. So you cannot just have this. This could be one of the ways in which it is being utilized. But this cannot be the. Now let's look at case 4. Case 4. So see 3 curtains of 5 feet, 2 curtains of 5 feet. Now I'm talking about 1 curtain of 5 feet. If I have 1 curtain of 5 feet, can I have 2 curtains of 7 feet? No, because it will exceed 17. So with this, I am writing the combination 1 curtain of 9 feet. That means 9 and 5, 14. So the trim loss is going to be 3 feet. Then there is one more case possible. Case 5. The combination of 9 and 7. So 1 curtain of 7 feet. And together with this you have 1 curtain of 9 feet. So 7 and 9, that is 16, and therefore trim loss in this case is going to be 1. You can pause here and see there is no other case possible. You cannot have 4 curtains of 5 feet, the maximum is 3. Then 2 curtains of 7 feet, which is 0 curtains 5 feet. 2 curtains of 5 feet, 1 curtain of 5 feet. And case 5 is a combination of 7 and 9. Okay. Now the most important thing here is to introduce the variables, which is let xi be the number of pieces cut in ith case. Please understand once more. So let xi be the number of pieces cut in the ith case. So please remember that each piece was 17 feet in length and there were many such pieces. Each piece can be cut in any one of these 5 cases. So there are many pieces and many curtains required. So we are assuming x1 is the number of pieces which are cut in case 1 format. That means x1 number of cloth pieces have been cut to give you 3 curtains of 5 feet each. Similarly, x2 is the number of pieces which are cut in the fashion of case 2, which means they are going to provide you, each one of them is going to give you 2 curtains of 7 feet and so on and so forth. So let's see how many 5 feet curtains are we getting, because the question is about requirement was given. So if you remember the question, how many 5 feet curtains are required? 700. So total 700 curtains we must have which are 5 feet. Now let's see, we are going to get 3 curtains of 5 feet from here. We are only concentrating on 5 feet right now. So 3 curtains of 5 feet. If x1 is the number of pieces which are being cut in this fashion, the total number of 5 feet curtains that you will get will be nothing but 3x1. Each piece will give you 3. So x1 pieces will give you 3x1 curtains which are 5 feet. Case 2 does not give us any 5 feet curtain. Case 3 gives you 2 curtains of 5 feet each. So the fashion in which case 3 is being utilized is x3 number of pieces. That means each gives you 2 curtains. That means it is 2x3. And what else? Case 4, let's see, 1 curtain of 5 feet. So if this x4 was a number of pieces being cut like that, x4 number of curtains is what we are going to get from there. Alright. So 3x1 plus 2x3 plus x4 is the number of, this is what? This is the number of 5 feet curtains you are getting. Now what do you want this number to be? If you go back to the question, we want this number to be exactly 700. But it's very difficult to solve a linear programming problem which has a strict equality to be solved. Therefore, we at least want these many. We are okay with if we have more, but at least the requirement should be fulfilled. That means what we do here is that the number of 5 feet curtains here is going to be nothing but greater than equal to the required number, which is 700. That means the first constraint that we are getting is the number of 5 feet curtains should be at least the number that you wanted, which is 700. Now repeat this procedure for 7 feet as well as 9 feet. Let's look at 7 feet. Case 1 does not yield any 7 feet curtain. Case 2, each piece will give you 2 curtains. So x2 pieces will give you. So if you look at the equation that we get, in this case, in the same fashion will be, so case 2 first, that means 2x2. Case 3, is it giving us any, 7 feet curtain. So x3, not giving, case 4 does not give us any 7 feet curtain. Case 5, that is x5. 2x2 plus x3 plus x5, and this number needs to be greater than equal to 300. 9 feet curtain, last case. No 9 feet curtain from here, no 9 feet curtain from here, no 9 feet curtain from case 3 also. The only way 9 feet curtains are coming are from case 4 and 5, and that too 1 each. So the constraint becomes x4 plus x5 needs to be greater than equal to, what was the number of 9 feet curtains required? Number of 9 feet curtains required was 400. So if you go back to, this has to be equal to or greater than equal to 400. This is going to be greater than equal to 400. So the constraints that we get are 3x1 plus 2x3 plus x4 greater than equal to 700, 2x2 plus x3 plus x5 greater than equal to 300, x4 plus x5 greater than equal to 400. This was for 5 feet curtains. This one was for 7 feet curtains, and this is for 9 feet curtains. But what is the objective function here? Because remember, we have to formulate the linear programming problem. We need the objective functions also. So the objective was, what was the objective? Objective was to minimize the trim loss. In each case, whatever trim loss you are getting, you would like to minimize that. So what is the trim loss here? If you look at this case, trim loss is 2 feet. x1 pieces, so the total trim loss will be 2x1. From here it will be 3x2, no trim loss here, so 0 times x3, 3 times x4 and 1 times x5. So the trim loss, the total trim loss is going to be nothing but case 1 2x1, then there was 3x2, then there was 0 times x3, which of course you may not write, 3x4 plus x5. This is a trim loss, and what is our objective? We would like to minimize it. So therefore the linear programming problem is minimize the objective function, say z, which is 2x1 plus 3x2 plus 3x4 plus x5, subject to, what were the constraints that we had? So we're just copying down the constraints now. 3x1 plus 2x3 plus x4 was greater than equal to 700. The second was 2x2 plus x3 plus x5 was greater than equal to 300. x4 plus x5 greater than equal to 400, and xi's need to be non-negative, isn't it? Because how many pieces do we want? Has to be a non-negative quantity. If you want to further complicate a little bit, you can also add, you may add the condition that xi's need to also be integers. Okay? Okay, so now I would like to draw your attention to two questions. The first question is question number 1c, which says that prove that the sequence an satisfying the condition, there is some condition given. The condition is actually mod of an plus 1 minus an less than equal to alpha times mod an minus 1, where alpha is a number between 0 and 1, and this is for all natural numbers greater than equal to 2. Prove that a sequence an which satisfies this condition is a Cauchy sequence. You have to prove that this is a Cauchy sequence. Now what I want to discuss in this question is that Cauchy sequence is not technically written as part of the syllabus anywhere, but it's always understood that whatever basics are required for that topic have to be covered, irrespective of whether they can't write down each and every word, they can't write down each and every theorem which can be covered. Cauchy sequence, if you don't know the definition of Cauchy sequence, it is impossible to attempt this question. So I would like to accentuate once again that any topic that you are doing, you must do all the concepts related to it, whether categorically that topic has been mentioned in the syllabus or not. You must do something which is basically required to have a deeper understanding of that topic. So I would just give you the definition of what a Cauchy sequence is, and then you should work on this question. That if you have a sequence an, then it is said to be a Cauchy sequence if and only if. Basically, Cauchy sequence means that the elements of an are coming closer to each other. So, if you have a sequence A1, A2, A3 and so on and so forth, the elements are coming closer to each other. And by closer, what do we mean? We mean that the distance between, say, AM and AN has to become smaller and smaller and smaller, and this cannot happen from the beginning. So there has to be a stage after which this starts to happen. That is precisely the definition of a Cauchy sequence. A sequence an is said to be Cauchy if and only if for each epsilon greater than 0 there exists a n naught belonging to n such that mod of an minus am is less than epsilon, and this is true for all n and m greater than equal to n naught. Okay? Now, there are several ways in which this can be interpreted, because n and m have to be greater than equal to n naught. You can also put n equal to m plus p, because if m is bigger than n naught, and if you put n as m plus p, then m plus p is also bigger than n naught. So sometimes you find this definition also as am plus p minus am being less than epsilon for all m greater than equal to n naught and p being a natural number. So the crux of the story is that a sequence is said to be Cauchy if and only if the elements are coming closer to each other. And if you see, that is precisely the kind of definition that was given in the question. An plus 1 minus An is becoming smaller. It is becoming less than alpha times An minus 1. And this is true for all n. So you put n equal to 2, n equal to 3, n equal to 4, and you visualize how the elements are coming closer to each other. Then try and use this definition to show that this is going to be a Cauchy sequence. The second question I would like to draw your attention to is question number 3c. Now, what is so special and what is so relevant about both these questions is that question number 3c, okay, let me just write down the question first. It says, if u is equal to tan inverse of x cube plus y cube upon x minus y, where x is not equal to y, then you have to show some very long equation, which is x square del 2u by del x square plus 2xy del 2u by del x del y plus y square del 2u by del y square. You have to show that this is nothing but equal to 1 minus 4 sine square u sine 2u. Huge expression. This is what has to be shown. Now, this looks like pretty much a question where you have to apply your knowledge of partial derivatives. If u is given, you have to find del 2u by del x square, which means you have to find del u by del x, first order derivative, then second order derivative, then the mixed derivative of second order, then second order derivative with respect to y. And after you have found out all these expressions, you have to just put them in and you should get the answer. That's easier said than done, because u is not a very simple expression. It is tan inverse of this whole expression. You know, the thing that I was trying to accentuate here is that this question can be easily done using Euler's theorem, which I'll just state for you. But the point I'm trying to highlight is any theorem or result which is based on a mathematician's name, Euler's, Cauchy, Newton, you have to know the statement of them. Whether or not it is written categorically as part of the syllabus or not. This is part of partial derivatives, basic calculus, not very advanced, not very difficult. Yet a lot of people tend to ignore it because it is not written in the syllabus. They can't write down each and every theorem. So please, you have to do Euler's theorem, Cauchy's theorem, Leibniz theorem. So in calculus there is a Leibniz theorem. Of course, there is a L'Hopital's rule which is written, and so people do it, but things which are not written also have to be covered. So what does Euler's theorem say? I would like to draw your attention to that. Euler's theorem says that if you have a function which is homogeneous. So first of all, let's try and see whether this function is homogeneous or not. How do we do that? So u is tan inverse of this expression, therefore tan u is nothing but x cube plus y cube upon x minus y. Now if I take x cube common from here, I get 1 plus y by x the whole cube upon, let's take x common from here, 1 minus y by x. As you can see, this cancels, this becomes x square, and this whole term is nothing but a function of y by x. This is the definition of. So tan u is x square, some function of y by x, which shows that this function is homogeneous, and it is homogeneous of degree 2. The homogeneity of this expression is of degree 2. So what does Euler's theorem say? Let's write that down. Euler's theorem says that if z is a homogeneous function of degree n, if z is a homogeneous function of degree n, then the first result is x times del z by del x plus y times del z by del y will be nothing but n times z. And the similar result for second order. For second order we have x square del 2z by del x square plus 2 times xy del 2z by del x del y plus y square del 2z by del y square is nothing but n minus 1 z. So this is going to be an application of Euler's theorem, which says the following. So I'll just give you a hint of how you're going to proceed. Let us put z as say tan u, okay, then we can find del z by del x easily. Now this is a much simpler expression. Del z by del y, find del 2z by del x square, find del 2z by del y square, and the mixed derivative also. Find all the possible first order and second order derivatives. Then you put it in this. Here n is equal to 2 because z was tan u and tan u was nothing but x square, a function of y by x. Therefore z is a homogeneous function of degree 2. So you find out all these 5 derivatives, put it here and put it here, and when you just simplify this expression, you get the desired expression, this whole thing. You can easily get this. The solution of this is attached at end of the video for your reference.